In today's shifting world order, a storm has erupted in the Gulf that could redraw global alliances. Israel, in a shocking and unprecedented move, has launched strikes on Qatar. The official reason given by Tel Aviv is simple yet controversial: the claim that Qatar has been sheltering and financing Hamas leadership, that Doha has become a safe haven for those Israel sees as its greatest enemies. But beyond the headlines, beyond the smoke rising from Doha's skyline, lies a much deeper reality. This attack is not just about Hamas. It is about control of narratives, control of resources, and control of the world's political chessboard. Qatar, known globally for its immense gas wealth, its global media empire Al Jazeera, and its carefully cultivated image as a mediator in world conflicts, now finds itself the victim of direct aggression. Civilians have been displaced, hospitals and schools have been damaged, and the sense of shock in the Arab world is immense. For decades, Qatar positeo itself as the tiny state with a loud voice. But tonight, as Israeli jets roar over its skies, its leadership finds itself both vulnerable and cornered. Yet the story does not end in the Gulf. Thousands of kilometers away, in the heart of West Africa, a young leader has stepped into this crisis with words that are already echoing across continents. Ibrahim Traoré, the 36-year-old captain, who rose to the presidency of Burkina Faso, has issued a fiery condemnation of Israel's actions. For many, it may seem unusual. Why would an African military ruler involve himself so directly in a conflict thousands of miles away? But to those who have followed Traoré's rise, it is no surprise. Since taking power, Traoré has positioned himself as the uncompromising voice of anti-imperialism, a soldier who sees Africa not as a collection of weak, dependent states, but as a continent destined to resist Western domination. He has spoken against France's neo-colonial grip. He has rejected American interference. And now, with Israel striking at Qatar, Traoré frames the aggression not as a Gulf issue alone, but as part of a broader global pattern, a system where small nations are bullied, where wealth and might dictate legitimacy, and where the oppressed are left voiceless. In his speech, Traoré declared, "When one small nation is attacked, all oppressed peoples bleed. Qatar is not alone. Africa stands with the Gulf against aggression. Today, Israel bombs Doha. Tomorrow it may be Bamako, Niamey, or Lagos. We reject a world where might is right." These words may seem symbolic, but the reactions have been anything but ordinary. Across Africa, from Mali to South Africa, hashtags praising Traoré's courage have trended. In the Middle East, his name has suddenly entered living rooms and news debates. A Qatari journalist, live streaming from a bombed-out neighborhood, remarked emotionally, "Even when our neighbors hesitate, a young leader in Africa is speaking for us." This, for many in Doha, has become a source of unexpected hope. But hope in geopolitics is dangerous. For Israel, Traoré's voice is not just background noise. It is a rallying cry that could inspire new coalitions. For the United States, already concerned about its shrinking influence in Africa after France's retreat from the Sahel, Traoré's emergence in the Gulf crisis represents a new and unpredictable challenge. Washington fears that he could bridge Africa's anger with Arab frustration, creating a South-South solidarity that undermines both interests. Inside the United Nations Security Council, this new dynamic was visible. Qatar's ambassador described the strikes as state terrorism, calling for international condemnation. Israel defended its actions as necessary defense. But the unexpected intervention came when Burkina Faso's delegate read Traoré's statement aloud. Gasps echoed in the chamber. Delegates from Latin America and Africa discreetly applauded. Western representatives frowned, and the American ambassador leaned toward an aide, asking bitterly, "Who gave that kid a seat at this table?" It is not just rhetoric. Qatar itself is at a crossroads. With the U.S. airbase at Al Udeid on its soil, Doha has always walked a delicate balance, hosting American military power while maintaining ties with groups Washington disapproves of. Now, after Israeli bombs, that balance may break. If Qatar tilts away from the West, the Gulf could face a new realignment, one where Turkey, Iran, and perhaps even African state rally to Doha's defense. In Tel Aviv, Israel's leadership debates this very scenario. Some ministers argue that Qatar must be punished until it bends. Others warn that the strikes may backfire, uniting the Arab street against Israel in ways unseen since the early 2000s. What few in the room fully grasp, however, is the symbolic power of Traoré's intervention. For decades, the Global South has sought a voice strong enough to link Africa's pain with the struggles of the Middle East. In one fiery statement, the young Burkinabe leader may have become that voice. Meanwhile, Washington grows uneasy. Pentagon officials admit that Qatar's instability threatens their own military presence. In private briefings, U.S. generals warn that if Doha turns hostile, America's position in the entire Gulf could weaken. And with Russia and China already making inroads in Africa, Traoré's words look less like empty rhetoric and more like the foundation of a movement that, if left unchecked, could redefine alliances in both Africa and the Middle East. As night falls over Doha, families huddle in mosques, uncertain if the next strike will come. Aid convoys struggle to move through rubble, and yet, on phones and televisions across Qatar, one clip circulates again and again. Ibrahim Traoré's words of defiance. For the people of a wealthy but wounded state, the idea that a distant African leader dares to stand with them has become strangely comforting. But comfort is fleeting. In geopolitics, words can be more dangerous than weapons. And as Israel continues its strikes, as Qatar seeks allies, and as the United States weighs its options, one truth becomes clear. This crisis is no longer local. It is global. And Ibrahim Traoré, whether Israel likes it or not, has become a central figure in it. The question is simple, yet terrifying. Will his words remain a rallying cry for the oppressed, or will they spark a chain reaction that plunges both Africa and the Middle East into a confrontation with powers far stronger than themselves? The first hours after Israel's strikes on Qatar left the region shaken. But Doha was not willing to remain silent. Within 24 hours, the Qatari government launched a full diplomatic counteroffensive. Statements poured across Arab media. Qatar condemned Israel, demanded global sanctions, and accused Tel Aviv of deliberately targeting civilians. But Qatar's power has never been its military strength. It is its diplomacy, its wealth, and its ability to mobilize the world's attention. Doha activated its media machine. Al Jazeera, watched by millions across the Arab and Muslim world, shifted to non-stop coverage. The images of destroyed schools and injured children filled television screens from Cairo to Jakarta. Israel's justification was drowned out by scenes of human suffering. And yet, even this vast media campaign lacked something, a unifying voice to connect Qatar's plight with broader struggles across the world. That is where Ibrahim Traoré entered the stage again. From Ouagadougou, he delivered another address, this time more direct, more emotional, and more political. He declared, "Qatar is not isolated. It is part of a global resistance against domination. From the streets of Gaza to the villages of Burkina Faso, from the deserts of Mali to the skyscrapers of Doha, one truth unites us. The small will no longer bow to the mighty. Israel's bombs are not just an attack on Qatar. They are an attack on the dignity of all oppressed peoples. These words lit a fire. Arab youth, long frustrated with their own government's cautious diplomacy, found inspiration in the unexpected figure of an African soldier. On social media, posters appeared showing Traoré's face beside Qatari flags, with slogans like "One struggle, one voice." But Israel, too, recognized the danger. For Tel Aviv, Qatar's diplomatic maneuvering was expected. What was unexpected was the rise of Traoré as a global symbol of defiance. The Israeli leadership quietly reached out to Washington, urging the United States to counter this narrative before it spread further. In Washington, closed-door meetings became tense. Generals warned that America could not afford to lose Qatar, home to its largest base in the Middle East. Diplomats worried that if the Gulf rallied around Qatar, the entire balance of U.S. influence in the region could shift. And intelligence analysts began tracking the speeches of Ibrahim Traoré, classifying them as strategic influence operations with the potential to destabilize Western interests. Meanwhile, in Africa itself, leaders watched closely. Some, like Mali's Assimi Goïta, praised Traoré openly. Others remained cautious, fearing that siding with Qatar would bring them into direct confrontation with the United States. But among ordinary Africans, there was little hesitation. For decades, Africa has felt ignored in global politics. Now, one of their own was not only speaking, but shaping the conversation on one of the world's most explosive conflicts. The second week of the crisis marked a turning point. Israel's air campaign in Qatar slowed but did not stop. Doha's diplomatic counteroffensive intensified. And in Africa, Ibrahim Traoré transformed from a defiant speaker into a full-fledged political actor on the global stage. At a summit of non-aligned nations in Addis Ababa, Traoré arrived not as a regional figure, but as a global voice, in front of leaders from Latin America, Asia, and Africa. He connected the dots between the Gulf crisis and Africa's long history of exploitation. His words echoed with revolutionary clarity. Qatar's suffering is Africa's warning. Today, bombs fall on Doha. Tomorrow, sanctions may fall on any African nation that dares to be free. We must stand together, not as isolated states, but as a united front of the oppressed. The hall erupted in applause. Leaders from Venezuela, Cuba, and even some Arab representatives expressed solidarity. For the first time in decades, an African leader had managed to place his continent at the heart of a global political realignment. Israel responded by intensifying its lobbying in Western capitals. In Washington, think tanks suddenly began publishing reports labeling Traoré as a destabilizing populist and a potential threat to democratic norms. In Paris, whispers emerged that Europe should prepare new sanctions on Burkina Faso. The message was clear. The West was preparing to contain him. But far from silencing Traoré, this only fueled his popularity. Across Africa, demonstrations erupted in support of Qatar and against Israeli aggression. Protesters carried posters of both the Qatari emir and Ibrahim Traoré, chanting slogans of unity. In Doha, these images reached television screens, giving Qatar a new sense of strength. Though militarily weak, Qatar now possessed something priceless: global solidarity from unexpected quarters. And in the Middle East, this solidarity began to put pressure on Arab states that had normalized relations with Israel. Populations in Jordan, Egypt, and the Gulf demanded stronger stances. Governments, already fearful of unrest, had to tread carefully. Meanwhile, Russia and China saw opportunity. Moscow praised Traoré's statements, positioning itself as an ally of both Africa and the Gulf. Beijing quietly offered economic assistance to Qatar, hinting that the crisis could be used to weaken Western influence in both regions simultaneously. The world was shifting. Israel, once confident, now found itself diplomatically isolated. Washington, once dominant, now faced the possibility of losing influence in both the Middle East and Africa at the same time. And at the center of it all stood a young African soldier, whose words had grown into a global movement. But danger was approaching. Reports began circulating of covert operations being planned against Burkina Faso's leadership. Western powers, unwilling to tolerate this new wave of defiance, were preparing their response. Yet questions remained. Would this solidarity hold once the bombs stopped falling? Would African nations truly unite with the Arab world, or would old divisions return? And most importantly, could Ibrahim Traoré survive the growing pressure from the West, which now saw him not as a nuisance, but as a genuine threat? As the dust settled over Doha, the world understood one truth. The Gulf crisis was no longer just about Israel and Qatar. It was about a shifting global order, an order where Africa's voice, long silenced, had finally found a champion. In the final analysis, Israel's attack on Qatar may have triggered something far larger than it intended. It may have awakened a new age of resistance, one where the oppressed, from Africa to the Gulf, no longer wait for permission to speak. And at the center of that awakening stands Ibrahim Traoré, soldier, president, and now symbol of a world that refuses to kneel. These words went viral once more. For many in the global South, Traoré had become not only a leader, but a symbol, proof that even small nations could influence the greatest of powers. But symbolism can be dangerous. As analysts in Washington admitted, the crisis had revealed something new, a growing solidarity between Africa, the Middle East, and parts of Asia and Latin America. This global South alliance, fragile but real, threatened to weaken the Western-dominated world order. Israel, facing global criticism, began to scale back its operations. Qatar, though scarred, emerged with newfound prestige as a victim-turned-symbol of resilience. And Ibrahim Traoré, the young soldier from Burkina Faso, stood at the center of this new narrative. The final stage of the crisis was not measured in bombs alone, but in politics, diplomacy, and the battle for hearts and minds. Qatar, though battered, refused to surrender. Israel, though militarily strong, found itself politically weakened. And Ibrahim Traoré, though leading one of the world's poorest countries, had become a name recognized across continents. In the United Nations, debates reached a fever pitch. The U.S. and Israel argued that Qatar must stop supporting terrorism. Qatar countered that Israel was guilty of state terrorism itself. Into this storm, Burkina Faso's delegate once again spoke Traoré's words. History is not written by the strong alone. It is written by the defiant. And today, the defiant will no longer be silent.